Why can't the European Union leave the Sahel alone? They've called it the poorest region on Earth. They've warned that it's too dangerous, too unstable. And when the military took over Burkina Faso, they were the first to step back, cutting diplomatic ties, turning their backs. But now, they're back. Suddenly, EU representatives are flying into Ouagadougou, shaking hands, smiling for cameras, and meeting behind closed doors with Burkina Faso's Prime Minister.
Hello, African enthusiasts. Today, we're diving into a geopolitical twist that has the whole world talking. The European Union, yes, the EU, is now pleading with Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, Ibrahim Traoré, to restore diplomatic ties. But why the sudden desperation? What's at stake for Europe? And how has Traoré, once underestimated, flipped the tables on global power dynamics?
Why can't the European Union leave the Sahel alone? They've called it the poorest region on Earth. They've warned that it's too dangerous, too unstable. And when the military took over Burkina Faso, they were the first to step back, cutting diplomatic ties, turning their backs. But now, they're back. Suddenly, EU representatives are flying into Ouagadougou, shaking hands, smiling for cameras, and meeting behind closed doors with Burkina Faso's Prime Minister. 3 days. That's how long they stayed. 3 intense days trying to patch things up. So the question is, why? What changed? Why is the European Union, after branding Burkina Faso a military dictatorship, now eager to deepen relations with that very same regime?
From cutting ties to making bold alliances and reshaping Africa's position on the world stage, Traoré's moves have sent shockwaves across Brussels. Stay tuned as we break down what really happened, why the EU is panicking, and what this means for the future of West Africa. Burkina Faso's defiant stand in a shifting global order. The streets of Ouagadougou echoed with chants as Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the youthful, resolute leader of Burkina Faso, defied the lingering shadows of Western influence. To many Africans, he embodies a new era of Pan-African pride, a lion cub roaring with the spirit of Thomas Sankara. When Traoré turned his back on the European Union, it wasn't arrogance, it was conviction. He declared that Burkina Faso would no longer be a puppet of post-colonial powers masked as partners. For decades, the EU had poured funds, sent advisors, and offered military aid, always with strings attached. Traoré saw through the hypocrisy. Democracy preached, but coups tolerated when beneficial. He severed diplomatic ties like a farmer weeding out a tired harvest. The message was clear: Burkina Faso would chart its own destiny. Now, in 2025, the balance of power has shifted. Once dismissive European leaders are the ones knocking, no, pleading, at Ouagadougou's door. Global instability, energy dependencies, and Africa's rising alliances with non-Western powers have forced a reckoning. Burkina Faso, once overlooked, has become central to the new geopolitical chessboard. Why would a union of 27 wealthy nations beg a 36-year-old revolutionary? Because Traoré stands at the crossroads of Africa's awakening. His defiance inspired a continent. His policies disrupted the old world order. The lion cub has grown, and now it is Europe that listens. The West's security gamble backfires. Traoré's expulsion of French troops in 2023 was initially branded as reckless by international observers. But with time, it has proven to be a masterstroke of strategic defiance. In the vacuum left by Western forces, Burkina Faso adopted a bold doctrine of self-reliance. Local militias were mobilized, the security forces were restructured, and alliances with new partners, chiefly Russia, were forged. The result? Traoré's government has reclaimed large areas once gripped by jihadist insurgents.
2 years ago, President Traoré of Burkina Faso made a profound statement. He said, "Soon the factories will rise." This word of prophecy is now being fulfilled in Burkina Faso. Just last month, we celebrated Burkina Faso's first tomato factory. And now, we are celebrating the rise of another factory, the Burkinabe Gold Factory. Now, not only has Traoré launched a gold factory, but the factory is now operational and has produced Burkina Faso's first locally made gold bars. What a remarkable achievement. How many African countries blessed with gold resources can boast of this? But how did Traoré achieve this? Let's find out.
The Sahel is no longer a buffer zone maintained by foreign troops. It is becoming a fortress built by its own sons. Brussels had hoped that chaos would break Traoré's spirit and force him back into the Western fold, like a goat returning to the shed. But the opposite happened. The Burkinabe people doubled down in support of their leader. Security improved. Trade corridors reopened. The economy didn't collapse under sanctions and isolation. It adapted and evolved. Now, a quiet panic brews in European capitals. Burkina Faso's survival, no, its resurgence, poses an existential question for Western influence in Africa. If Traoré can succeed without Europe, what's to stop Mali, Niger, Chad, or even Senegal from following suit? The European Union is facing the unintended consequences of its own arrogance. It gambled on Traoré's failure, but instead of collapse, they are witnessing the rise of a self-assured regional force with no appetite for foreign tutelage. And now, the West is knocking, while Traoré, with history on his side, decides whether to open the door.
The approach that we have had with USAID and the other things like the President's Initiative on AIDS, how does our U.S. approach compare and contrast to the approach of Russia in Africa and also Communist China in Africa?
The battle for resources, gold, uranium, and strategic minerals. Burkina Faso's soil is far richer than textbooks suggest. Beneath its red earth lie vast gold reserves that for decades attracted foreign corporations, especially Canadian-French mining conglomerates. These companies extracted billions in profits while offering meager benefits to local communities. But under Captain Ibrahim Traoré, that exploitative era came to an end. He seized mining licenses, restructured contracts, and empowered state-run cooperatives to ensure the nation benefited from its own wealth. Yet gold is only part of the story. Burkina Faso is also home to critical minerals, resources that have become the lifeblood of the global green transition. Lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements, vital for electric vehicles, solar panels, and AI technologies, are now more valuable than oil. As the EU scrambles to reduce its reliance on China, Africa has emerged as a strategic alternative, and suddenly, land once dismissed as undeveloped is now a geopolitical prize. But the game has changed. Ibrahim Traoré holds the keys to this mineral treasure chest, and he is no longer negotiating from a position of weakness. The EU isn't offering aid or democracy lessons, it's begging for access. Quietly, EU envoys have been landing in Ouagadougou with proposals, incentives, and apologies. And Traoré? He doesn't rush. He knows what's at stake. He knows how history was written and who wrote it. Now, with the upper hand, he waits. He watches. And most importantly, he remembers. This time, Burkina Faso won't trade its future for another false partnership.
Africa's future, particularly in matters of peace and security, cannot be outsourced. For far too long, our security has been treated as a burden to be managed by others, with the minimal input from us, and often without the benefit of our context or consent. This approach has failed to deliver both for Africa and for the world.
All right, we hope that France is listening to this. For years, Africa has been striving for true independence and the chance to make its own choices, but it has faced challenges like outside meddling and divided leadership. The creation of the Alliance of Sahel States AES showed a powerful move away from this, yet their actions have often been met with silence or skepticism from other African leaders.
The rise of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. The EU underestimated the power of African unity. In the past, divide and rule was the Western tactic, offering aid to some, sanctions to others, keeping African leaders distrustful of each other. But Traoré, along with Niger's General Chiani and Mali's Colonel Goïta, flipped the tunes. The Alliance of Sahel States, AES was born, a mutual defense pact, economic agreement, and political alliance built without Europe's help. No flashy press conferences in Paris, no glowing articles in Le Monde. Just African leaders meeting under the hot Sahel sun, making plans for a future where decisions are made in Bamako, not Brussels. This new bloc shook the EU. Not only did it threaten European mining contracts and military footholds, but it signaled a deeper shift, the emergence of a Pan-Africanist front. Young Africans from Dakar to Dar es Salaam see the AES as the start of something bigger.
3 African nations just did the impossible. For decades, Western powers have told us African nations can't manage their own money. They need our expertise, they need our systems. Today, that narrative has collapsed. While the world was distracted with conflicts and other things around the world, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, the Sahel Alliance, just created a new central bank and an investment fund. Something that ECOWAS has struggled to create for the last 30 years and haven't succeeded. Have you ever wondered why a continent with $45 trillion worth of natural resources has a poverty rate of 40%?
And the momentum is real. Joint military drills are being held without foreign oversight. Cross-border infrastructure projects are being negotiated in African languages. Cultural exchanges are being promoted to reinforce unity, not division. Even discussions about a shared Sahelian currency are underway, symbolizing an ambition to cut ties with the CFA franc, a remnant of colonial control. Meanwhile, the European response is disoriented. Once the puppet master, Brussels is now the outsider peering in. And as the AES flags flutter proudly across the Sahel, a new chapter is being written by Africans, for Africans. Europe, watching from the sidelines, fears it has lost its grip for good.
Today we're exposing an intriguing tale of sport, politics, and sovereignty centered around Burkina Faso's Tour du Faso, a cycling race that's been a major event in Africa for over 3 decades. But this year, the race hit an unexpected snag: Western sanctions. Yes, you heard that right. A cycling competition was deemed so controversial that the West decided to sanction Burkina Faso. Why? Because Russian cyclists showed up to compete. So here's the question of the day, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Should a sporting event face sanctions over political tensions? Should athletes from any nation be banned from competing just because their country has political disagreements with others?
Sanctions that hurt the West more than they hurt Africa. When Traoré cut ties, the EU responded the only way it knew how: sanctions. Aid was frozen, investment halted, visa restrictions enforced. The West expected Burkina Faso to crumble under pressure like dry maize underfoot. But Traoré and his allies were prepared. They turned east, to Russia, China, Turkey, and even Iran. Agricultural deals were signed, arms flowed in, infrastructure projects began, not with EU consultants, but with engineers from the global south. The AES started trading in currencies other than the euro or dollar. Even barter systems emerged. Meanwhile, European businesses were bleeding. Mining companies sued their own governments for failing to protect investments. German solar firms had contracts pending in the Sahel. French NGOs were kicked out. And with Burkina Faso pushing forward with new rail and road infrastructure, the EU is realizing they've sanctioned themselves out of Africa's most promising frontier. So yes, the EU is back at the table. But the seat is smaller, the meal is leaner, and the host no longer takes orders.
Traoré's decision to expel French forces and reassert control over the country's natural resources has resonated across Africa.
Mais en plus de ça,
Emmanuel Macron insulted all Africans in his remarks. There was one part that caught my attention, where he spoke of ingratitude, and that ingratitude is a disease that cannot be transmitted to humans. He is a human. Our ingratitude is not transmissible to him. This is how this gentleman sees Africa, sees Africans. We are not human in his eyes.
les Africains, nous ne sommes pas des humains à ses yeux.
The aborted assassination attempt of Traoré, allegedly orchestrated by neighboring Ivory Coast, added to the fury of many Africans. Burkina Faso's military junta says it foiled a major plot aimed at sowing total chaos.
Travail minutieux des services de renseignement.
The meticulous work of the intelligence service revealed a major plot being prepared against our country, the ultimate aim of which is to sow total chaos with a view to placing the country under the tutelage of an international organization capable of regaining control in 10 or 20 years' time, depending on the instigators.
The power of the people, African pride, reborn. What truly terrified the EU wasn't just Traoré's defiance, it was the people behind him. Across Burkina Faso, murals of Sankara and Traoré appeared side by side. Young men wore army fatigues in solidarity. Grandmothers in the villages gave blessings to the son who stood up. Social media lit up with hashtags like Mark Africans, for Africans, No More Neocolonialism, and A Traoré Way. Even in European capitals, the African diaspora rallied in support of the AES. It was no longer about one country. It became a continental movement, a spiritual revival. Europe, which had always used the language of human rights to mask exploitation, suddenly found its own hypocrisy on display. Traoré called it out. In his speeches, he asked why coups backed by the West were tolerated in Chad or Gabon while Burkina Faso was punished for seeking sovereignty. It resonated. Now, when the EU comes asking for diplomacy, it's not just a matter of politics. They're trying to silence a movement, but the people have already spoken, and their voice grows louder each day. The migration bargain that no longer works. For years, Europe controlled African diplomacy with the unspoken migration deal. We'll give you aid, you stop your people from crossing the Mediterranean. But Traoré never liked that bargain. He saw it as an insult, that Africa's value was measured by how well it stopped its children from seeking better lives. He called out the racism behind immigration policies. He demanded dignity, not deals. Since ties broke off, Burkina Faso no longer acts as Europe's gatekeeper. Migration routes have shifted, but more importantly, the narrative has changed. Traoré's government launched programs to retain youth talent. Agricultural reforms, entrepreneurship grants, and local innovation hubs sprouted in place of aid dependency. The EU is desperate. If more African nations follow Traoré's lead, their external border control strategy collapses. So, they're back, not to offer threats, but incentives. They want cooperation again, but this time, the cost is higher. The Burkinabe people are not for sale. A continental ripple effect, and Europe's waning relevance. Traoré's firm rejection of the EU sent ripples beyond West Africa. From the streets of Addis Ababa to the boardrooms of Nairobi, leaders are re-evaluating their alliances. Once, the EU was seen as the gatekeeper of international respectability. Now, it's a guest outside the House of African Progress. The African Union, traditionally silent on such diplomatic shifts, is slowly evolving. Under pressure from the people, it now acknowledges the legitimacy of indigenous governance, even if that governance doesn't fit the Western mold of elections every 4 years. The EU, for all its wealth and influence, is realizing that its relevance is shrinking. African countries have options now, and Ibrahim Traoré stands as a bold reminder of that truth. So they beg, not just because they miss Burkina Faso, but because they miss their place at the center of African decision-making. Traoré's silence is the loudest weapon. In all this, perhaps the most powerful act Traoré has made is his silence. While the EU dispatches envoys, writes letters, and issues appeals, Traoré remains grounded, focused on national development, regional unity, and strategic partnerships outside the Western sphere. He doesn't react with press conferences or dramatic gestures. He governs. And that, above all, frustrates Europe. They are used to African leaders begging them, not the other way around. The begging now is real, it's strategic, and it's historical. Because in 2025, the son of Burkina Faso has shown Africa how to walk alone and stand tall. So why is the European Union suddenly chasing after Traoré? It's simple. Power is shifting, and Europe can feel it. Traoré isn't just leading Burkina Faso. He's becoming a symbol of Africa's resistance to neocolonial influence. If you found this video eye-opening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a beat in global politics. What do you think? Is Traoré the future of African leadership, or a risk Europe didn't see coming? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay informed, stay curious.